Hello again. This is Dr. Robert Guthrie. It's back to be back with you. I know we had a 1-week hiatus due to the weather, but we're going to plunge ahead here. And this is my favorite character in all the Old Testament. And you think, why? Why would this be your favorite character? Because he is the most human of any of the major figures in the Old Testament. Some of these people are almost like Superman. Moses can fight off the tribesmen and save the daughters of the Midianites and become close with them, and he can go in and tusk to tusk with the Pharaoh and talk to God and bargain with God and get the Ten Commandments and all that. And King David is able to fight Goliath as a teenager, probably 13 or 14, and he's handsome and he's charming and the women all love him and he's musical, all those things I'm not. And they're all brave. Some of the good kings are brave and all that. But Jonah isn't like that. Jonah is the most human of the characters in the Old Testament. He whines, he pouts, he crabs, he's cowardly, he runs away. It sounds like the rest of us. So it makes you feel comfortable that this character is in here. Now, it's an interesting little book. It's only 4 chapters. You can read it in 10 minutes. And it's one of those things, when you have kind of a quiet down day, you're feeling a little bit blah. It's a story and it's fun, so you may want to take it and read it. If you're really having a problem and you're really upset, then the 4th chapter of Philippians is my favorite, because it's Paul. He's getting old and tired and he's fought the good fight, and that really bolsters me up. But these are just advice for you. So Jonah is an interesting little thing. And like I said, my favorite character in the Old Testament. Now, it's set in the time of the reign of King Jeroboam II. The name comes from a character mentioned very briefly in 2 Kings 14, chapter 14th chapter, 25th verse, and it mentions Jonah and the father. That's it. It is this. And so this basically short story is set in that time, even though it wasn't written then. It appears to be, and it's not entirely clear exactly when it's written, but most people, and I think absolutely, that it was written in the post-exile period, when they had a couple quiet centuries after the return from exile and before they were conquered by Alexander the Great and his follow-up Greek rulers. And so it's in this relatively quiet period. The author is totally unknown. There's no claim of authorship. Nobody really knows. And it's, like I said, it's a very interesting book that it's what I call pseudo-history. Now, is this true? This book can cause a lot of problems for the literalists, for the people that say every word in the scriptures is exactly as God dictated it. Everything has to be true. I'm not a literalist. If you're familiar with the stuff we've done, clearly a lot of there's contradictions in the scriptures. Some of these things are clearly not historical, even though they claim to be. There's 2 creation stories: 1st Genesis, 2nd Genesis. There's 3 different descriptions of how they conquered the whole. You get on and on about the various things. But this is clearly what I call, and it's called the wisdom literature: Job, Jonah, and Esther. And literature means that they're not true, that they were written as a story to make a point. And it makes a great point, 2 great points in it, several great points actually, in this 4th chapter story. But it's not factual or chronologically true or anything like that. It's a story, and it has a great meaning to it. So it's written in what's called the quiet period. I call the quiet period. After they came back from exile, and it's actually said a couple weeks ago that the dating of when the exile came back isn't entirely clear. It's in the 530 to 480 range, probably the earlier side. And they come back from exile, and it takes them decades to come back. And they settle in, and they have Ezra and Nehemiah, which we talked about. And then you have this a couple 100-year quiet period where there's nothing written historically. There's no account of what it was like. There's no prophets predicting this or that or demanding this or that. And I think it's because it's really the only time in the Hebrew history when they had overlords that they were comfortable with them. The Persians were benign rulers, and they puts them way different than any other empire in the Middle East. Even now, they were benign rulers. Their attitude toward the Hebrews was, listen, you can worship your God exactly the way you want to. We don't care. Go worship him. And manage your own affairs. You all take care of the petty grievances and stuff. And we will protect you from the outside, and you'll be loyal to us. This is very similar to the way we've handled the United States has handled its island colonies, territories, commonwealths, and all that. That's our attitude toward the people in Guam. Govern yourselves, and we'll provide security and this and that, and federal programs. And then same thing for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. You ever been to the Virgin Islands? They're a territory, but everywhere you drive, there's American flags flying off people's yards because they're really happy to be part of it. So they were happy. The only time in their history they were happy to have an overlord. So it's probably written in that period. And that period is a period where it starts with Ezra and Nehemiah restoring the temple Judaism, in which they have an ethnic purity, and they have a temple-based Jewish religion, and which is led by the hereditary priesthood. So it's a fairly firm, this is what we're doing. And it can only be our people. It can't be these half-breed children or this and that. And when you get into Jonah, this is just not an issue in Jonah. And so Ezra and Nehemiah had that firm point, and they really thought that God was their God, just for their people. And Jonah is part of the writings, like the second part of Isaiah, which says, wait a minute, this is the only God, and therefore he's got to be everybody's God. Now, this is something that we take for granted, that God is the God of the Americans and the Turks and the Chinese and the Australians and everybody. But that's also something that they took. And so that's part of what we're seeing here. Then you'll also find the compassion will show. We'll talk about that at the end. The other thing about the quiet period is, even though we don't have any writings about the history, we have no idea who the governors were and this and that and the other, until the Maccabean Rebellion in about 175 BC, so it's about 300 or 400 year period. Clearly Judaism was changing at that time, because you had Ezra and Nehemiah about 470 BC, and then you have the Maccabean Rebellion 300 years later, and then you have the time of Christ 170 years later. By the time you get to the time of Christ, Judaism had changed somewhat. We know of at least 3 different tracks of Judaism at that time. You had the Sadducees, and they were the old elite, the aristocracy, the landowners, and they had a very conservative approach. They only have the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah of the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah. They did not believe in an afterlife, devil, heaven, hell, anything like that. Then you had the Pharisees, and the Pharisees had adopted a lot of beliefs that they had picked up probably from Persian Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, I don't know that much about it, but it has 2 worlds, a world of conflict, a world of good, and a world of bad. It has angels and devils and this type of conflict, which we've recognized much more and we've adopted. The Christianity really came out of Pharisaic Judaism, and they adopted that. They had the concept of a Messiah first, even though there had been mention of a Messiah come to save us in various prophetic literature, particularly in 2nd Isaiah. They believed in it firmly. And then you had the Essenes, which is one of the other groups, and they were much more of an apocalyptic type group. The end of the world is coming, and God's going to punish us all, and they were looking for 2 messiahs, a spiritual one and a military one, etc. So even in this quiet period where Jonah was written and Esther was written and Job was probably written, you had this evolution going on inside Judaism that shows up when we get back into the comprehensive writing of the New Testament. So, why is Jonah my favorite character? Well, like I said, he acts like the rest of us. Like I said, he's not heroic like David. He's not handsome. He's not charming. He's an ordinary person. This is a very brief book. He's an ordinary person who gets a divine call. The divine call is he's to go to Nineveh. This is set back in time about 500 years when the Assyrian Empire was still in existence. And they are the bad guys. They were like Stalin and the Soviet Empire was in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. They are the bad guys. And they really were bad. They were nasty and evil and all that. He gets a call from God to go to Nineveh, their capital, and preach to them. And, you know, the typical person would go off bravely, oh yeah, and this guy acts just like the rest of us. He said, go to Nineveh, forget it. I'm going the other way. Nineveh would have been east and somewhat north. He gets on a boat and heads to the west, essentially aiming to get across the Mediterranean outside of I would presume outside of the Straits of Gibraltar. They did have sailing out that far. He's trying to run away from God. Now, you and I are a little shocked at this concept, but remember, the universality of God is still evolving at the time because you can't run away from God. We know that, but he tries anyway. So this is like if I got a call to go to Pyongyang, North Korea to convert the heathen there. I really wouldn't be too happy about that one. Would it do me any good to take off for Argentina or for Norway or somewhere like that? No, it really wouldn't, because you couldn't escape God. But anyway, he tries. Basically, his attitude is forget it. I'm going the other way. So he goes down to Joppa, which is on the coast, pays his fare, gets on a boat, and the boat is heading west toward a mythical thing that they call Tarshish. And that's just kind of a mythical site, really, I would presume, outside the Straits of Gibraltar or somewhere out in the Western Mediterranean. It's just a made-up name. And God gets mad and sends a storm. So this huge storm comes up, and Jonah's down in the hold sleeping, and the people on the crew of the ship and the passengers getting really concerned because the ship may sink. So they pray to all their various gods, and nothing happens. Then they cast lots. Now, casting lots is a customary thing at this time where you could identify people. It sounds, nobody really knows exactly what it involves. It sounds like some kind of dice thing or throwing various sticks around. That's how they chose to replace Judas the Apostle. They cast lots and stuff. I don't know how they really did it. But anyway, they cast lots, and the lots tell them that the culprit for this is Jonah down asleep in the hold of the ship. So they go down and wake him up, bring him up, and they say, who are you? And he says, well, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship Yahweh, the one God. And they say, well, what's going on? And he basically says, well, I'm probably the cause of all this. I'm trying to run away from God. God wants me to do something. This is the gist of the story. I'm kind of, extemporating along the way. But I'm trying to run away from God. And they said, you can't do that. So, and he says, and they're throwing the cargo overboard, trying to keep the ship from sinking. And he says, well, you better throw me into the water because God has done this. He's mad at me. So they throw him overboard, and as soon as he goes in the water, the storm stops. So good evidence that's the cause of this. And then the second chapter, you have this kind of poetic thing that most people think is an insertion put in a couple hundred years later. The book was probably just the first, third, and fourth chapters. And the second thing is added, so I kind of skip over that. And basically they throw him in the water, and he's sinking down, and the Lord has a great fish swallow him into his stomach. Now, the traditional naming of this is a whale. The text does not say whale. The text says fish. Were there whales in the Mediterranean at the time? Probably. Did the Hebrews know about them? I doubt it. I don't know whether they knew about whales or not. But it's not the word that would be used in the Hebrew text for it. This goes way back when I was a little kid, about 10 years old. We were at a church dinner in West Virginia, like a Wednesday evening supper, and the guy who was running the program wanted me to answer a question from the audience. Here, I'm this kid. But I was a good kid, so I would do that. And So, what happened to Jonah? And I said he got swallowed by a whale. Well, he wasn't a whale, it says a fish. And this is where the literates really get hung up, because there's really no way a human could go inside a fish. There aren't even fish big enough to swallow a human. And most of the whales couldn't do it either. And so, but anyway, that's part of the story. So he spends 3 days in the body of the fish, and God makes the fish vomit him up on the beach after the 3 days. So people can look at this, and I see the significance of it. Here's buried in the Old Testament hints about Jesus, because Jesus spent 3 days in the tomb, not 3 complete days. It was Friday evening, all day Saturday, Sunday morning, but he was in the tomb for 3 different days, in the tomb in the earth for the resurrection. So it has that insight. And so he gets barfed up on the beach, and God contacts him again, and he says, okay, I'll go to Nineveh. So he goes up to Nineveh, which is the capital of the Assyrian Empire, up in northwest Iraq, up near the Syrian and Turkish borders. And the city's so big that it takes him 3 days to walk across it. That's a pretty big city, even if you're just walking. And so then he goes into about a third of the way into the city, and he starts preaching. And he expects everybody to say no, and God will destroy the city. And he gets to watch God destroy the city. But everybody doesn't say no. They say, oh, okay, that's great. They put on sackcloth and ashes and mourning for their bad behavior and mourning for their lack of belief, and they become followers of Yahweh, of the Lord. The king hears about this, and he joins them and announces this official conversion of the community to the Yahweh faith. And so this is clearly where it's literature, because that didn't happen, and we know that didn't happen, but it makes a great story. So what does Jonah do? Instead of saying, like I would, hey, we got away with that one, good job, God. He doesn't have that way at all. He's mad at God. He chews God out. Listen, you told me you were going to destroy these people. I wanted to see you destroy them. So he crabs at God. Now, this is interesting, because Job does the same thing, arguing with God, crabbing at God, criticizing, telling him how to be God. I got a lot of nerve, but I don't have that much nerve to try to tell God how to be God. So it's an amazing story to see this character. So he gets crabbing and fussing at God all the time, and he decides he's going to go out. And he goes out to the east side of the town, of the city. It's a city, not a town. And he builds a shelter there, and he sits there. So the next day, he's sitting there in the small shelter in the shade. And the night before, God had made a castor oil plant, which is one of the plants in the Middle East, grow up rapidly overnight, complete the height overnight, in a divine miracle, and shade him nicely from the shade of this. This is the same plant from which you do get castor oil, which is the purgative thing. So it's interesting that they identify the plant that way. And Jonah's sitting there, and he's still mad at God, because he wanted God to destroy the city so he could see it destroyed. And so he sits there and he pouts. And I love this part of it, because when I was a little kid, I was a very sensitive male in West Virginia, and I was a great pouter as a little kid. And so I could really identify with that part. I haven't pouted in a long time, but I hope anyway. And but I was a great pouter as a kid, so I can really identify. So he sits there and pouts the whole day. When God provided him with shade, and he's been merciful and all this, and he pouts and he crabs. So that night, God makes a worm come and kill off the castor oil plant, and it withers up and dies. And the next morning, God sends this hot east wind off the desert, and he's sitting there miserable because the castor oil plant has died, and it's hot. And he starts crabbing at God again. I've come and done this for you, and I should be dead. I feel terrible. I feel awful. Why you've done this to me, et cetera, et cetera. And God says to him, listen, bud, you did nothing for this plant. You didn't plant it or make it grow or anything like that. I did that. So I can provide the plant for you, and I can, and to show you mercy, and I can take the plant away. And that if I'm going to be merciful if you want to be too merciful to the plant, then I need to be merciful to the city, which has hundreds of thousands of people in it, and all the animals, etc. And I'm not going to destroy it just to destroy it. I will be compassionate and merciful and show my compassion on these people. So you see two concepts here that are episodic in the Old Testament, but very important. One is the universality of God. Now, that's a relatively newer term from 2nd Isaiah during the exile, 200 or 300 years prior to this was written. But if you've got only one God, as he said in 2nd Isaiah, then that God is everybody's God. The God of the Assyrians, the God of the Babylonians, all these bad people out there. Everybody's God. So he has to show compassion. And second, God is compassionate to the sinners, which is a good thing because we're all sinners, except for my wife. And I need God's compassion for my sinning too. I try to control my sinning, as we all should try to control. But it's there. So it's God's compassion for everyone. So those are the lessons, and then it just stops, So, and you've got some lessons here where Judaism is moving beyond that ethnic purity, rigidity of Ezra and Nehemiah, which only these people this is the God for. And you got a universal God, and you've got a God of compassion, where he's the God of the Assyrians in addition to the God of the Hebrews. And he's the God of the people in North Korea. Poor people. So I don't think I'd be any better under that kind of charge than Jonah was. So this is my favorite character because he acts like a real person. He acts like we would act like under these circumstances. He pouts, he crabs, he whines, he's cowardly, he runs away. He tries to all those things that we all do as humans. And God shows him mercy too, in addition to showing mercy to the Assyrians. So it's a very, very interesting book. So when you're a little bit down, pick it up and read it. Take you 10, 15 minutes. You can skip the second chapter, and it'll exhilarate you. This is a story. It's a short story. It's a brilliant short story. And it comes from that particular time during the Persians, and it's meant to make those 2 points, that God is compassionate and God is universal. And you can't run away from God because he's universal. You've got to, and don't argue with God like these people do. So anyway, my favorite character in the Old Testament. I hope you enjoyed this account as much as I did. This is Dr. Guthrie. Now, next week, it's Esther, which is the last of these 3 literature stories. Esther set during the Persian reign. It also is a story written just for its own purpose. This is Dr. Guthrie. I'll see you in a week. Thank you very much.